Hello there, very warm welcome to you, and I'll look at what's in the papers today. With me, the journalist James Rampton and Dave Wooding, political editor for The Sun on Sunday. Very good to have you both in the studio looking through the papers with us. Let's just show you the front pages then. Sunday Telegraph leads on the government's £60 million investigation into historic allegations of abuse in Iraq. The paper says it understands MPs are about to conclude that that is unfit for purpose. The Observer reports that Theresa May's government is going to make a major shift in housing policy away from promoting home ownership and towards better deals for people renting properties. Donald Trump appears to have found a new ally in the shape of the former Archbishop of Canterbury, George Carey, who's quoted in the Sunday Express as hitting out at the hysterical overreactions of the president's critics. The Sunday Times has investigated what it calls deficiencies in defence procurement, including ships so noisy, apparently, that Russian submarines can hear them 100 miles away. The photograph is of England player Ben Teo celebrating victory over France in the Six Nations rugby. And finally, the Mail on Sunday's headline is a story about the former UKIP leader Nigel Farage and how he is sharing a £4 million property in West London with his friend who's a French politician. Right, let's kick off. Let's talk about the former Archbishop of Canterbury defending Donald Trump, first of all. Donald Trump, again in the news just in the last few minutes, in fact, of course, because court in the United States has put a blocker again on his appeal on the travel ban, a federal appeals court denying the Justice Department's request for a reinstatement of that travel ban. But anyway, the former Archbishop of Canterbury saying critics are being too hysterical about it.
Yes, I mean, I think this is a terrific story from the Sunday Express. He said that the critics have had a hysterical overreaction, and he says that it's a characteristic of those who consider themselves progressive to reserve condemnation for America and ignore much greater evildoers. I mean, I do think that's an interesting line to take. Also, the fact that Trump said he would give priority to Christian migrants from some of the Middle Eastern countries, I think that's played well with Carey. But interestingly, another religious leader, Cardinal Vincent Nichols, has said that true political leadership does not play the fear card. And I think that's a really good line. When we're in the grip of what seems to be almost a constitutional crisis in the US, this backwards and forwards between the different courts, and the world is gripped by fear with what Trump's going to do, these massive protests everywhere. I mean, I do think that it's very, very scary, and I don't think it's a hysterical overreaction to what the leader of the free world could do.
Yeah, I think what Mr. Carey's doing it here is he's trying to calm down the hyperbole we're hearing. People are using the word fascist in relation to Donald Trump. Now, let's be straight about it. He's not a fascist. He's a democratically elected president. And this business in the courts shows that he's not a dictator either, because the courts are holding him to account.
Although he was criticised for criticising the judge who went against him as being
so-called judge.
A so-called judge. But you know, some people in America are saying that's actually undermining the independence of the American judiciary.
We did have a little bit. Their judiciary are not quite as independent as ours because they're politically appointed. We had the same business here over the Brexit vote, when there was some members of the government criticising, and the media as well were criticised for
enemies of the people.
Yes, yeah. But what George Carey is saying is that, you know, let's just calm down the language a little bit. Yes, he isn't an ideal president, but there are worse people around, and he recalls how when he was Archbishop of Canterbury, he was asked to sup with some really odious people such as Robert Mugabe, and he mentions North Korea, Sudan, Assad, various other people, and of course we have some problems on our own doorstep.
We're talking about the leader of the free world here,
yes.
So we shouldn't be putting him into the same bracket as those people anyway.
No, absolutely not. But I think that there is a greater point here, that the people taking to the streets about Donald Trump tend to be people of the left. You don't see them taking to the streets about, say, the president of Hungary, who was criticised and built a wall of his own against immigrants. And we have Slovakia, we have similar outspoken...
But we are just a few days into the Trump presidency, and we've got this legal battle starting to unravel, haven't we?
Well,
between on this travel ban between the president and the courts.
What strikes me is how cataclysmic it appears. After only 2 weeks, it seems like there's almost a massive culture war going on in the US and resonating throughout the world. You know, when you have Chuck Schumer, the Democrat minority leader in the House, in tears talking about the travel ban, you have Patrick Leahy, long-serving Democratic senator, saying he's served with every president since Ford. He's never seen such a catastrophic order.
Although Donald Trump said they were fake tears, didn't
Well,
he?
yes, and he said I must consult his acting coach. Typically offensive comment, in my view. But when Kenneth Clarke gave that great speech about Brexit this week, he talked about us going down the rabbit hole and coming out in the Mad Hatter's Tea Party. I slightly feel like that's what we're going through with Trump at the moment.
Yeah. There's also a little point he makes in here, Lord Carey, about there's a considerable list of duds who served as president, some of whom railed against the bids to abolish slavery back in the day, and also others who bombed other countries in episodes of ill-considered military adventurism, as he calls it.
Well, he's not wrong there.
So there you go.
We won't go too far back into American political history.
Do you remember that Adams? Yeah, he was terrible.
Yeah. Right.
He wasn't, actually.
Now, The Observer, this story about a shift in Conservative housing policy in favour of people who rent. This is potentially significant, isn't it, Dave?
Yeah, this is, as they rightly point out in the headline, it's a break from the Thatcher homes revolution when she famously in the 1980s gave the right to buy for council house tenants. What Theresa May seems to be focusing on in this new policy, which is being unveiled on Tuesday, is generation rent. She's going to try and bring down rents. Now, reading the details of this, it's not quite clear how she's going to do it. She's having consultations with rental organisations and at the same time trying to flood the market with more affordable rental homes to bring down the cost of rent.
And in a sense, I suppose that the Conservatives have been forced into that because young people just can't afford to buy.
Well, that's right. I've got 3 daughters who are approaching the age when they want to leave home, get rid of their parents, obviously. But how, if they live in London, how can they possibly afford the rent on starting salaries? It's just impossible. I mean, I do agree it's interesting that Theresa May is breaking with the Thatcherite credo. I remember there's very famous footage of Mrs Thatcher having a cup of tea with the first council house owners who bought the house from the state. So this is a massive sort of philosophical shift. But she's got to build 250,000 new houses a year if she's going to meet this target.
Bringing down rents is a good thing.
Yes.
It will affect a lot of people. But what the underlying problem of home ownership is that the number of people owning homes has fallen dramatically since 2010. There are 382,000 fewer couples with children who now own their own home. And that fall, when we were trying to build a home-owning democracy in this country.
But it's interesting because in other European countries, actually, home ownership is not such a big deal. People take for granted the fact that they will maybe rent all their lives.
In Germany, it's just a given that you'll do that. And we have this thing... The old-fashioned phrase, the Englishman's home is his castle. Yeah. I think we really do believe that we're a property-owning democracy. But, you know, it's a market as well. And if you're priced out of the market, as May is discovering, you have to find a way around that and enable the younger generation who you want to work to be able to live in an affordable house.
Let's go to the Mail on Sunday. Nigel Farage and some salacious allegations about him that we may not go into too much detail on. But Dave,
you're only good libel lawyers.
But Dave, I mean, Nigel Farage, he's gone from politics, but he hasn't gone in a sense.
No, he's now got a radio show. He's a very colourful character, and he's always great value. And anything he does is looked at quite closely. But, I mean, he was asked by the Mail on Sunday a few weeks back whether he'd left his wife and said no, he hadn't. We bumble along like any other couple. And now it appears he has a political friend who's a little bit younger than him staying in the £4 million bachelor flat pad where he spends the weekdays. Right. Now, he's insisted that she is... a friend who is staying there purely for she's nowhere else to stay at the moment. He's helping her out, but she was involved in this funding issue, which was looked at by the European Union some other time.
OK, let's move on to Sunday Times. There we are. Huge gaps in British defences, all to do with defence procurement, allegations about some of our submarines, which are rather noisy, apparently. The Russians can hear them from 100 miles away.
I think this is a great story. I mean, it does make, the MOD look a bit like the comedy of errors. In a way, Russian submarines can hear these clunky ships, which sound like a box of spanners underwater from 100 miles away. And they're costing, billions of pounds. There are also things about the frontline tanks that have been too light and can't fit properly into the transporters. I mean, it's absolutely absurd that they didn't check these things before. And after all, it's our money, isn't it? And it seems to be this blithe thing. Oh, well, if this takes 9 years and we have to reduce the size of the Navy or the Air Force or whatever, it doesn't matter. But it does, because it's our money, and the MOD is one of the biggest spending departments.
Well, they are always staggering sums of money, aren't they, the MOD, in terms of their procurement budget. These are billions and billions and billions of pounds.
Yeah, I remember the last Labour government running into quite a bit of difficulty over the overspend in the budget. And we're talking about some drones here, £1.2 billion worth of drones, which haven't been used yet because they don't work. And these Ajax armoured vehicles which are faulty. One of the people interviewed in here talks about how in submarines they were sticking wooden wedges in the hatch to stop it rattling so it couldn't be heard by Russian submarines.
He said that was a very good way of sorting the problem, but it makes it seem
quite cheap actually as well.
It seems very Heath Robinson though. And the other aspect is that the MOD apparently is justifying these noisy ships by saying, oh, well, when they were ordered X years ago, we didn't think we had the Cold War again. But hello, Putin in Ukraine and increasing his sphere of influence in Syria, there's very much a Cold War back on the agenda.
So you think it matters if the Russian subs can hear our ships?
I do, because they've got this new sub called the Black Hole, which sounds absolutely terrifying. You can't hear it coming. It's like, Harry Potter in an invisible cloak. He's there, and he's got you before you can actually see him. So
I thought that was the idea of submarines.
Well, it is, but I think the MOD hasn't worked that out. No, I'm sure they have, but it's the Russians have leapt ahead with their technology, and that's what's alarming people.
Yeah. OK, Sunday Telegraph. Now, they've got the government's £60 million investigation into those historic allegations of abuse in Iraq as being unfit for purpose. That's according to a parliamentary inquiry, or an expected conclusion of a parliamentary inquiry. Does that surprise you, Dave?
No, it doesn't. It's a leak of an inquiry which is due to come out shortly. But this comes in the wake of Phil Shiner, the lawyer who was struck off last week for, I think he claimed £1.6 million in fees using legal aid to drum up false allegations against our servicemen and women serving in Iraq. And it now seems that we're funding him to the tune of £200,000 went to his legal firm, and £1,110, I think it was, £1,000 went to this Iraqi fixer who went round drumming up business. So, of course,
and some of the British soldiers in the frame for this have spoken very movingly about the stress that it's put them under. I mean, often already suffering various kinds of post-traumatic stress anyway, and then the stress of the legal battles they've had to go through.
Absolutely. I mean, I do think that the word witch hunt is strong, but I think it's justified in this case. I mean, Shiner lodged nearly 2,500 criminal complaints against troops, and so far there have been no successful prosecutions in 7 years. I mean, that's an extraordinary failure rate, and it does raise questions about why the MOD actually funded him and his agents to mount what may well be a witch hunt, and has caused a very, very unnecessary degree of stress. And I think it's quite right, if it's going to be so strong, attacking the MOD for doing that.
And actually, the press have campaigned quite heavily on this, haven't they?
Yes.
On behalf of British soldiers, and saying that they've been unfairly, had a witch hunt against them. And do you think that's been?
The MOD have said that they take the way our troops behave in theatre seriously, and they do it because we're a civilised country. We look at these things. The problem is it's dragged on too long, and it's been on an industrial scale. And in fact, you know, like you, Ben, I've been out on these operations, and they're a very professional lot by and large.
Yeah. And actually what some of them were saying, I was hearing in interviews last week, is commanders, it will make them think twice about all the decisions they make in the heat of battle. Thinking, you know, trying to second guess what kind of legal consequences they might face.
It's like doctors now are thinking twice about taking certain procedures because they're worried about legal action. I would say that it's absolutely right that we do take action when there is evidence of wrongdoing, like in the Barhat Musa case, you know, the hotel receptionist who was beaten to death. Quite right that people were brought to book about that. It's also what distinguishes us from the terrorists. You know, the fact that we have a rule of law that we adhere to. We don't behead people we disagree with. They go through due process. And I think it's absolutely right that we do that. But this seems to have gone over the top.
Now, speaking of rules, Dave, there are certain rules to be observed when we talk about chocolate bars, which I know is a subject very close to your heart.
Yes.
And apparently they're shrinking by 20% in a war on sugar.
It's the war on sugar, yes.
This is the next tabloid campaign, isn't it?
They're going to cut the size of our chocolate bars by 20%. I'm surprised they've not blamed it on Brexit, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, when all's said and done, the Remainers say that the people who voted Brexit were fruit and nutcases, so perhaps they should. But 20%, if they're going to cut it by 20%, what I'd like to know is, are they going to cut the cost of the bar by 20%?
I think that's unlikely.
Yes, in which case we're all being diddled.
Well, I think this is definitely a huge scandal, Chockgate. You know, but the manufacturers of chocolate, and this I do apologise if people are having breakfast, so they haven't been able to do it before, because if they put artificial sweeteners, they have a rather an unfortunate effect on your stomach. So God forbid that chocolate should actually cause you harm, because it's one of the great pleasures in life.
Indeed.
We won't have any chocolate right now. We might go and have some breakfast.
Once we go and have some now.
I think it's a little bit early. OK, thank you so much. Dave Wooding and James Rampson. That is the papers for now. Just a reminder, we'll be taking a look at tomorrow's front pages every evening at 10:40 here on BBC News.